my name is Moz, and I'm a developer relations engineer for web privacy and security at Google Chrome. And I live in Berlin, Germany, and I love water sports, and I love traveling as well. And like most of us here, hopefully, I also love building web applications. And I started off, playing with HTML and JavaScript, and then that led me to my first job as a front-end developer, then full-stack developer. And then I joined a team who was building a privacy-focused product. And so I shifted my focus a little bit onto privacy and security. And before I knew it, it quickly became my main focus. And I think it's an interesting topic because it's very deep. On the one hand, you can get very deep on that topic. But also coming from web development, it crosses over many different areas of web development. And another thing I like about it is that it's often discussed in circles outside of tech, at the dinner table. So it's kind of, I think there are not so many technology topics at all like that. So that's what I like about it. And today I want to share with you a few tips that I've learned about web privacy on my own journey. But before we do that, I want to take a little trip in history. So in the winter of 1828, that's what Wikipedia says, just here in the city of Nantes, a writer was born. Not too far from here, actually, on a little island here. His name is Jules Verne, and his work is the theme for this conference. It was hard to miss, with all the booths we saw and so on. So he grew up here, and then he moved to Paris to study and become a lawyer. Not because he wanted to, but because his dad wanted him to become a lawyer. And fortunately, he didn't listen, and he ended up doing something completely different. So what he did instead is he wrote adventure books. So he wrote adventure stories like Journey to the Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues Under the Seas, Around the World in 80 Days. So all of his books give a central place to the technological advances of his time. And for this reason, some call him the father of science fiction, which is, pretty cool of a title, I guess. So he got very successful. And one of the reasons why is because what he wrote about, it captured people's imagination in a very unique way. It was the 19th century. People were really excited about upcoming changes, the progresses of transportation, the steam train, and so on. So back then, some people were a little worried as well. So for example, some people thought that taking the train, the steam train, it was so fast back then that they thought that it could make you crazy. You would hop on the train, and then you would hop off and be insane. It's an actual thing. There were like tons of articles about that in the US back then. So it's kind of crazy. It's still, today, so while we'll still love Jules Verne's stories, we're a little bit more pessimistic, I feel, about the future. So if you think about science fiction movies today, they're more about apocalyptic stories. We're a little more scared than excited about the future, right? So people are deeply concerned about technology today. As a society, we're worried about AI, or machine learning, whatever you want to call it. So we worry about social media addiction. We worry about privacy and surveillance, especially on the web, because it has become a key piece of infrastructure, especially during the pandemic and after that. So that's the first reason we, as web developers, should care about privacy on the web, because we have a responsibility towards our users. And there's also a second thing, because I know, as developers, let's admit it, privacy is kind of, initially, honestly, it looks a little bit boring. So I'm so glad you're here, because there's privacy in the title. Because you have a privacy policy, it's kind of text. Then you have a cookie banner controls, it's like toggles. As an engineer, it's like, honestly, it doesn't look very interesting at first, right? I think we can agree on that. So not too exciting. But actually, what I want to do today, take you on a trip to try and change that view a little bit. Because in reality, our privacy decisions as developers, they can impact user experience in very visible, very concrete ways. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So here it is. This is our trip around web privacy. And what I would like you to take away from our concrete tips and things you can do today or tomorrow or probably on Monday, on your site to improve both privacy and user experience. And in case you're wondering, this is the actual map for around the world in 80 days, which is a story of two men who decide to try and complete a loop around the planet in 80 days, which is meh today, but back then it was a crazy idea. So they traveled by steamboat, steam train. They traveled through the Suez Canal, which was a new thing back then. They even traveled by elephant. So even though, I suppose, hitchhiking back then, as we know it today, didn't exist, what they did on that trip, it kind of looked a lot like hitchhiking. So before we move on, one disclaimer: this talk contains absolutely no legal advice at all. I doubt there are lawyers in this room, but just in case, so you have been warned. And with this, we can get started on our trip. And our first stop, it kind of has to be the cookie banners, right? So before I move on, just a quick note. Along this talk, I'm going to use a demo web app as kind of a red thread. It's a little web app I built. It's just a demo to kind of plan your trips. So you can enter an overview of your planned trips. You can get a little overview of each trip with a map inline, so you can kind of check out the place ahead of time to decide what you're going to want to visit. We also have a few video embeds for tips on how to plan your trips if you need that. And there's also a page that's kind of empty right now with trip ideas. I'll come back to that. It's unusable as an actual trip planning app, so don't use it. But it's good for this demo today because it does a few things that web apps or websites do, and that seem kind of minor or like normal, but that can hurt privacy and UX. So that's what we're going to talk about. So back to cookies, cookie banners. Nobody loves cookie banners, but here we are. It's kind of the way user consent is requested today. And maybe you have your own consent system in-house, but it's kind of difficult to maintain depending on what it is your organization do. So many teams actually rely on a third-party consent provider. So it works like this. You sign up on a cookie banner, a cookie consent provider site. So here I used cookie bots, but the most commonly used is cookie yes. Maybe this rings a bell to you as a developer or as a user. Maybe you would see this when you visit websites. Then you enter your config, you enter your domain name, your cookie banner settings, like the text you want in there and so on. And then the provider is going to scan your domain, so scan your site and look for cookies over there. And the provider is also going to give you a script that you're going to embed into your site, like insert into your page directly. It looks like this, nothing too groundbreaking. And then once you've done all of that, boom, magic, the cookie banner is going to be displayed on your site, and it's going to also, that's the important bit, automatically list the cookies and also categorize them in a few categories that we're all well too familiar with. You have necessary preferences and then statistics and marketing. So this is very convenient, but we want to be careful about the ways this can impact user experience. Not just because the cookie banner is annoying. What I'm going to talk about is a bit different here. So first of all, like any other third-party script, really, this is going to impact performance, right? But just like any other third-party, it's just the way it is. So what you want to do for the cookie banner, you want to adopt the same performance best practices you have adopted in other places. So before I show that to you, sorry, just a second. Yeah, OK. So performance best practices. So first, you want to use async on the script I showed earlier, if that's possible, if you can. And you also want to establish an early connection with the cookie banner origin with pre-connect, which is here on top. So little performance tips. There are more, but this is kind of an overview. And that's for performance. And the second issue cookie banners can cause is layout shifts, like this one here. So a layout shift is when the page layout is going to change unexpectedly. So you lose your place, and you can end up clicking a button you didn't want to click. It's so frustrating, right? Just like here. It's like, I wouldn't want to have that experience. So a high layout shift, it can really damage your user experience. And actually, there's a metric to kind of measure the impact of layout shift on user experience. And I know it's early, but do you guys know the name? Do you folks know the name of that metric? It's silent. Crickets. OK, yeah? Yes, I heard it. Perfect. Cumulative layout shifts, but I'm going to say CLS because it's hard to say for short. So what you want to do is keep your CLS low. Low means below 0.1, ideally below 0.2 if you can do if you can lower it further. So to do that, we want to avoid top-of-screen cookie banners that push down the content like this one. Because you can see here, this is actually inserted into the DOM after the page has rendered. So it's going to push down other elements down the page. So we have a big layout shift here. And here the CLS I measured for that page, it's nearly 0.3, so it's not good. We don't want that. Instead, if you select something like bottom of screen, here I made my cookie banner more like of a footer cookie banner. Well, I don't have any layout shift here. My measure is actually 0 for the CLS on that page. And by the way, it doesn't need to be a footer. You would also fix the CLS problem if you picked a modal here. But I personally like the footer better because I feel it's less obtrusive, and it also doesn't compete for attention with other elements on the page that are on top, for example, if you request user permissions. So I think that's one good solution. How did I do that? Well, I didn't do much. I clicked a button. So that's kind of the cool thing here. I just checked the options I had in CookieBot in terms of layout config. And I saw I just could pick a different layout. So if you use a third-party content provider, check out the options available to you, because it may be possible for you to improve important user metrics with just a click of a button. So that's kind of nice. And in case you're wondering, for that specific CLS measure, I was using the DevTools Perf Insights panel to evaluate my CLS. An interesting thing about CLS that I didn't say yet is that it's a core web vital metrics, which is a part of a set of user experience metrics that are also used for page ranking, so for search ranking. So it's kind of a useful one to improve. So you can measure that, in Chrome DevTools, in Lighthouse. But if you're serious about Core Web Vitals, you're going to need something different, because this is just locally on my machine. If you're serious about CLS, you're going to want to see what your users on the field are actually experiencing in terms of Core Web Vital metrics. So there are tons of tips for that to kind of set up a lab and have this return to you actual measures from what your users are experiencing. So there are more resources over there, both on Core Web Vitals and also on Cookie Notice best practices, because I really just scratched the surface here. All right. So that's nice, but it doesn't really change the fact that cookie banners can be really annoying. Now, what's the second annoying thing I saw when I land on my demo app, the Super Trip Planner app? Maybe you couldn't see, it was kind of fast. The second thing that happens is there's a location permission request that pops here. So let's talk a little bit about permissions here. So let's say, as you can see over there, yes, on our demo side, as I said, we have a feature that's kind of useless, but for the demo purposes, it's nice. We have that feature to show to our user nearby trip ideas, okay? Nearby trip recommendations. So in order to do that, we're going to request user location. This is the reason why this permission request is there. Quick pause here. Why am I talking about permission requests? Because this is a talk about privacy, right? Well, the thing is, a permission request like this can feel very intrusive, because it's a little bit like you just met someone, like you never see them, you just met them, and they're like, oh, where do you live, It's like, it's not cool. And this is kind of exactly what we're doing here, right? And this definitely has a touch of intrusiveness, and I think we can feel it as users too. It feels bad to just get this permission pops on top of being on top of interrupting your flow. This feels a little bit intrusive to me. So this is the reason why you want to be careful about permission requests, also in the context of privacy. So this is exactly what we're doing here, and here, most likely, this is what's going to happen. first, the user is going to be annoyed, and second, would you grant permissions? Do you grant permission in that case? No, good answer, perfect. I'm glad you didn't say yes. So yeah, we're not gonna, I mean, most users are not gonna grant permission here. So I annoy my user, and on top of that, I don't even get to kind of give them a nice feature to kind of make up for the annoyance here. So it's a bit of a lose-lose situation. And I'm saying, yeah, most likely they will not grant the permissions because we actually have numbers on that. So this is a study for Chrome on Windows, so it's kind of a subset, you know, of permission requests. But this has shown that over 85% of location permission prompts are either blocked, dismissed, or ignored, which is, you know, concretely in practice, this is going to be equivalent to blocking it. It's a huge number, right? I thought it was interesting. So what this shows is it's worth kind of making sure that you optimize a little bit your permission requests to make sure they're granted. So how do we fix what we have here? Well, there's one best practice for permission requests is to request them in context. So like here, I don't actually know, of course, how Google search actually, you know, defines the mechanics of when to request location permission and not, but as a user, you can experience that. Like here on the left, I made a search for a, you know, best backpack for travel. So Google search could have decided, okay, I'm going to show you a few shops nearby, so can you give me your location? But no, they didn't do that. They only request location permission when I make a search that kind of hints that I'm going to need location. Like here on the right, my search is backpack shop near me, which is kind of a hint for Google to, oh, hey, can we get your location? So I'm going to be much more likely to grant in that case because it makes sense to me that Google search is going to need my location to address my request in the best possible way. So here, this is what we could do instead. Sorry, no code to show here, but it's kind of a little trick. Instead of requesting location on page load, we could instead request it when the user clicks the button, show trip ideas nearby. If they ever do, as you can see here. So this is less disruptive. It's also tied to user action, so it's going to make sense to users why we need their locations at that specific moment. And it also, ultimately, which is what you want, makes them more likely to grant the permission. So this is kind of a little trick here. So that's better. There's still kind of a bigger question here about, do you even want that feature at all? Is it worth it? Is it an important enough feature to go through the trade-offs needed? Because if you request location permission, you know, it comes with a number of like PII, personal data management tasks you're going to have to do. You're going to have to edit your privacy policy. Like, it's a lot. So there's a bigger question about, is this feature for your product meaningful enough and brings enough value to the user that it's worth going through this trade-off? It's kind of a bigger and deeper topic, but I think it's worth flagging that here. All right, so with this, let's move on. Where are we here? Yeah, we are already in Japan for privacy options. So we're just talking about trade-offs and decisions. So I want to tell you here a little bit about privacy options. And I'm going to take a sip of water and let you think about what that means. OK, so privacy options, what does that mean? So let's take kind of a step back and think about the way we build websites and web app here. So we often use third-party solutions. They are like super useful building blocks for the web. You have, you know, fonts, scripts, styles, images. You get maps, you get videos. You have a number of widgets, social media posts, embeds. But also maybe you have an error monitoring script in your application. Maybe you use a third-party payment provider. It's a very long list. So all of this is awesome because it enables us, developers, to kind of mix and match the blocks we need, a little bit like you know, building blocks. And I don't know for you, but I don't want to build a payment system from scratch. I don't want to build an error monitoring system from scratch if it's not the core thing, like the core feature my product should be focused on. So it's kind of really nice for us as developers to be able to rely on other developers, libraries, and also domain expertise. So we can include these features into our web apps in a way that is quick and also reliable, because we know this library is actually maintained by people who focus on just that. So this is great, but it also comes at a cost. And we actually saw it earlier in this talk with the third-party content provider. It's kind of a trade-off. It's nice and it's very helpful, but it comes at a cost. And the first one is performance. This is what we saw with the cookie consent banner from the third party. It means you're going to have to do more, or you're going to have to think about the way this impacts performance. And the second bit is trust as well. So when you select a third-party service, especially if you include a script directly into your page, so what we call script with top-level access, this has all powers. It can completely mess up your site. So I know you already do some due diligence. So when we select a third party, we're going to check if it's trustworthy, check if it's well-maintained, on top of checking all of the other user stuff. Like when you select a third party, you're going to check, OK, is pricing working for us? Is it actually doing what we want? Is it the feature set we want? And so on. But trust is definitely something, even if we don't necessarily call it explicitly, this is also something we check when we select a third party. What I want to talk a little bit about is what happens after. Once you select a third party, or once you have a subset of third parties you think are doing what you want, it doesn't actually stop here, because now we as developers, we have a set of privacy options also at our disposal. Within a given third-party solution, it's possible you have configurations and toggles at your disposal to change a little bit the privacy model of what the third party is doing. So, words, but I'm going to give examples. So this is our demo application. We have a few third parties here. So you saw we have a map embed. This is actually using Google Maps, because that's the one I know. We have a video embed. This is a video embed from YouTube in that case. And the third one is analytics, so Google Analytics in that specific case. It's kind of irrelevant what exact third parties I'm using here. I'm using this for convenience, but what I'm going to tell you about is valid whatever third parties you're using. So let's think a little bit about the privacy options at our disposal here. First, video embedding. So when you embed a video, a YouTube video in that case, there's a feature that's called privacy enhanced mode. So it's a simple checkbox. So what do you think it does? Maybe it's a difficult question that early. Can you say again? Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. It does not. It actually does something. Thank you for your contribution. It does something, so I checked. That's what the doc says. So here's what the YouTube documentation says. I'm going to read it, and then we're going to talk about what it means. With this mode, views of embedded YouTube content will not influence the viewer's browsing experience on YouTube. So what that means is that if a user is on my site, watches that video, and then goes to YouTube, they're not going to be showed related content directly within YouTube. OK. So not everybody will be sensitive to this, and maybe in your site's case or for your users, this is irrelevant because they actually maybe want personalization. Maybe they want to be shown relevant ads, relevant videos, sorry, on YouTube later. So not everybody will be sensitive to this, but it can be a nice privacy touch potentially to bring to your site. And it's super low effort as well because it's just a click of a toggle. So what else do we have here? Well, quick, we have maps. So we're using Google Maps in that case specifically. And there are actually two ways. I didn't know about that before building this little demo. There are actually two ways to embed maps into your web app. The first one is the Maps Embed API, and the second one is the Map.js API. So there are a few differences between the two. But basically, the Map Embed API is really just an iframe. There's only limited configuration you can do there. And also, it sets a cookie. So this is kind of good to know. That cookie is going to pop up in the cookie list we saw earlier in our cookie banner list, right? So that's for the Maps Embed API. And the second one is the Map.js API, JavaScript. Well, you're going to have to write some JavaScript for that one. It's not just an iframe. And it also doesn't set a cookie. And I think in general, like the distinction at a high level seems to be more around the lines of, the JS API is much more powerful. You can do crazy stuff with your maps, with the Maps JS API. But there's also that interesting difference. So this is something maybe to take into consideration or not when you're selecting your third party. One last example, we got to talk about analytics a little bit. Don't worry, I won't get into the details of that one. This is just to let you know that there are lots of privacy controls for analytics. So it's Google Analytics in that case, but I'm sure if you're using a different analytics provider, maybe you have such options as well. So I won't get into this, but there are a number of things you can do. You can configure your data retention. You can disable advertising. You can do a number of things. So it's worth checking it out. Because potentially there are a number of interesting options for you here to look at. All right, so we got video, maps, analytics, because these are the third-party solutions we were using in that demo app. But as I said, this goes beyond when you're using your third parties. Check out the docs and see if there are interesting privacy options for you to leverage and to change the privacy perceptions of your users, potentially by just clicking a few toggles. I'm oversimplifying, but there may be some of that here. All right, and with this, we're ready to move on to our next station. So we already crossed the ocean here. That was a very fast trip. And we are landing onto user agent. And that one is my favorite because it starts with something seemingly simple, but then it becomes a rabbit hole. So let's get started. So this is our little demo site, Super Trip Planner. And here I'm using the Web Share API, which also, anyway, with this API, what users can do is they can share links, but also text, with other apps that are installed on their device, and they can do that in a way that looks native. So if you're an Android user, that little banner that here comes from below, this is going to look native to you. And on iOS, with the Web Share API, this is going to look native as well, but native different because it's native iOS. So I thought this makes for a neat, a nice user experience, like especially on mobile. As a side note, if you're using the Web Share API, so it's supported in Edge, in Chrome, in Safari, and it's experimental in Firefox. So if you're using it, it's a good idea to use a fallback. But the Web Share API, it's not really my point here for that section. So let me show you. Because what the API does is it enables users, as I said, to share content in a way that looks native. So because of that, it's kind of it would be a nice user experience touch to also use the platform-specific icon for that share button, right? So here the left one is iOS. The middle one is going to be Android, and the right one is going to be if I'm on a laptop, on a Windows laptop. So how do I achieve that? Well, I'm going to want to assess what platform the user is on, right? And then once I have that, I'm going to want to set my icon dynamically as we have over there. So how am I going to access what platform the user is on? Question. User agent, yes. Excellent. So the user agent, actually navigator.platform, it's also a thing. It could have given me that, but if you check the MDN page for that, it says it's deprecated, so we probably don't want to use that. Here, what I'm doing is I'm using the user agent, and I'm parsing it to detect the platform, and I know it's very naive parsing. Don't yell at me. It's for the demo. It's just to show that's a simple way to kind of go ahead and detect the user agent. So this works fine, but we actually have a problem here. Another question for you. Do you see any problem here? Well, actually, can't really see it here, but... Yes. Yeah. So actually, the first place I'm going to be able to see the problem is DevTools. Have you seen that one? Have you seen that one pop up in DevTools lately? No? Interesting. Well, next time you see that one, you're going to think about that moment. So this is, by the way, this is the Issues tab. It's a place in DevTools to tell you about issues in your code and help you fix them. It's kind of, I think about it as an enhancement of the console, where we used to have lots of stuff pop in there. And it's also much more actionable. It gives you actual tips on how to fix the problem. So, so check it out, Issues tab. So DevTools is going to tell me, there's something with your user agent here. And so this is where our rabbit hole is going to start. So the user agent string contains a lot of information. And it actually contains too much information, because our user agent string, but also the fonts we've installed locally, the way your browser renders canvas elements, and so on. So all of these, there are bits of information that are somewhat stable over time for one user, but they're going to vary a lot across different users. And because of that, all of these elements combined, this is a short list, but like all of these elements combined, they can create a fingerprint of you as a user. And this fingerprint, it can be used for important safety purposes, for example, fraud detection. But it can also be used to track you across sites in a way that's called covert tracking, because there's no easy way for you to know that this is happening as a user. All of these elements can be combined to create a unique fingerprint of you that can be useful for important use cases like fraud detection, but it can also track you across sites, which is not what we want. You can actually try it out in this little demo I built, and it's super simple because it uses a popular fingerprinting NPM package, which is called fingerprint JS2. It's really simple. It's really easy to do. And the other issue with that is, because third-party cookies can be used for tracking users across sites, browsers are taking measures against these cookies and kind of phasing them out. But the thing is, fingerprinting is an alternative to that. So it's likely potentially to increase, like starting now and over the next years as well, because people who want to track you across sites need alternatives. And this is an easy one. So in order to combat fingerprinting, what, among others, Chrome is doing is gradually reducing the granularity of the information that's within that user agent string. And the goal for that is to make your user agent string a little less unique, so that it's harder to uniquely identify you across sites with your user agent string and other elements combined. So initially, this is what the user agent string looked like in Chrome for a Samsung phone before that gradual reduction of the user agent string. The orange bits are going to be changed or removed when the gradual reduction is over. So let me show you the diff here. So what do we see? There are important bits that are deemed not privacy invasive or not dangerous for not privacy hindering that are going to stay. Like you can see here, for example, the major version of the browser, the major version number, it's 93 here in that example. This is staying. You also have the platform, Android, this is going to stay. But the bits that are deemed potentially more privacy hindering and that can be used for fingerprinting, because they're likely to make you a little more unique, these are going to change. So the first one is the platform number. In that case, the platform version number. So after the gradual reduction, it's going to be 10, like always 10. It's not just for the example for that slide. The second bit is the device model here. You can see before the user agent reduction, it was pixel 5a, so the exact name of the device model, which is also mine, is going to be changed to that letter, K, so that's a little less informative. And finally, the detail, like the minor version number of the user agent, Chrome in that case, is also not going to be available anymore. So you can see the important bits, things we need more often, are still going to be around, but things that are a little more detailed and potentially could be used for fingerprinting are going to change. And so because of that, it's a good idea to already adopt the new way in Chrome to access user agent data. So it's called navigator.user agent data, surprise. So here on the left, you have the good old navigator.user agent. And here on the right, you have navigator.user agent data. So we can see a few things over there. You can see the brand, so you also have the browser vendor in there. You have a Boolean for mobile, which is convenient. And you also have the name of the platform. Now, if you look closely, in our specific case, if you remember what we were looking for, was the platform, right? The platform number. So this one is actually still available in the legacy, like in the user agent string. But it's still a good idea to use navigator.user agent data. First, because it's more robust. It's the new way to approach user agent data, and it's less likely to change in Chrome. And second, I think the site kind of speaks for itself. It looks much nicer, right? In terms of developer experience, it looks more reliable. You don't have some crazy parsing to do. So this is nice. Now the next question is, what does browser support look like? Don't yell at me, I know. So at the moment, Navigator user agent data, it's only available in Chromium browsers. So browser support looks like that. So of course, you can't just switch to that. What you can do instead is you can use user agent data when it's available to kind of try and benefit from the nice DevX and the clean way to access that data with no need for parsing, and fall back to regular user agent string when that is not available. So this can look like that. So you can see here, if the user agent data is available in the navigator, I'm going to set my platform to the platform bit in the user agent data. And otherwise, this is the code I showed a few slides earlier. This is the normal user agent parsing. All right. So there's that. Now maybe you're wondering, maybe you're not using the user agent string directly into your code, but maybe you have a dependency that does that for you. Maybe you have a lib that takes care of user agent string parsing. So in that case, of course, you don't have to do anything specific to benefit from user agent data availability, because this is going to be something the library maintainers are going to be working on. So that's an example for UA parser, which is one of the most popular user agent libraries. And you can see here they have an open issue for using user agent data. That's one example. One last thing. Like, what if you need more detailed information? What if you actually need, for example, the device model, that was removed in the reduced version of the user agent string? Well, in that case, you can use user agent data that get high entropy values, so you can still access that information, but it's not going to be visible, and the browser can monitor that. And the second bit is I showed kind of the front end, the front end piece of that, like the web call for user agent data. But in case you're accessing the user agent string via headers, there's kind of the equivalent of what I showed for headers, and it's called user agent client hints. So there are more information on that. You can also check it out. So everything I explained remains applicable if you use headers. All right. So now we're done with our rabbit hole, so we can get out of this. And we are ready to move on to our next stop for this journey. So we talked about user experience a lot, but we didn't talk so much about user behavior and what users are doing nowadays, now that they're a little more worried about their privacy. So as we said, users are getting a little more privacy conscious, and I think this changes a little bit how we should think about testing. So let me share a few ideas with you. This is going to be more of a rapid fire. So tip number one, test with private browsing modes. And when I say private browsing mode, it's called, it's incognito in Chrome. It's called private browsing in Safari, and so on. So they have different names, but you know which ones I mean. Another thing is, like I know I often pull an incognito window to kind of double check something and make sure I start with a clean slate. This is not what I mean here. What I mean is really more consider adding private browsing modes as one to do in your list of testing to dos when you test across browsers. That's what I mean. And I know it's already time consuming, to test across browsers. So like I was asking myself, okay, how do you decide actually how much of a priority is that? Should you always do that across all browsers? And I wish I could say that, okay, you can be data-driven about it. You can go ahead and you can check what percentage of your traffic actually uses private browsing modes. And then depending on that, if it's high enough, maybe it's worth it for you to actually dedicate time to that type of testing. So I wish I could say that, but I can't. Because the thing is, when the user uses private browsing modes, it's not going to be something you can detect programmatically. So analytics are also not going to tell you that. So what this means is that I don't know the answer. So you don't have a lot of visibility into that, and this is kind of the point, because that's private browsing. So what I can do instead is give you a few numbers that I found interesting on private browsing in general. First, 40% of Americans have used private browsing at least once. I couldn't find stats for Europe. I'd be curious if you know anything about that. But European users, studies have shown, are a little bit more privacy conscious than their American counterparts. So I would expect that number to be a little bit higher in Europe. That would be my assumption. And in case you're wondering, so the top reason people use private browsing modes is embarrassing content. Okay, so while it can be subjective, you know, what can be considered embarrassing content, but I think there are maybe some common themes here. So depending on what your site is doing, it could be an interesting data point to, you know, consider private browsing. Just saying. Another thing you could do, we talked a little bit about private browsing, but you can also maybe eventually check if some of your traffic uses some of these other browsers that have privacy in their headlines. Here are two examples, Brave and DuckDuckGo. And if you see that you have traffic coming from the sites, consider adding that also to your testing arsenal, to the list of things you do for cross-browser testing, alongside what we call, you know, like Chrome, Edge, Safari, Firefox, and other browsers you may be testing in already. All right, that was kind of the first tip to consider private browsers in your cross-browser testing approach. Okay, a bit of suspense on that one. I hid some bits in orange. So this is for the tip number 2. A few weeks ago, my colleague Thomas, he saw this bug report on a tool he was building. Okay, so the person says, hey, I block cookies by default. Unfortunately, your website doesn't handle that nicely. So notice here it says cookies, not third-party cookies. This user blocks all cookies. So you may think, okay, you know, in that case, you can't expect a session cookie to work, for example. So it's kind of expected, right? So far, so good, so to say. But then, unfortunately, your website doesn't handle that nicely, despite it not needing cookies to operate. And this person is right. The website doesn't need cookies to operate. So I'm getting this error because, what do you think the reason may be? I don't have a prize if you get that one right, but I would love to hear answers. It's a site that doesn't use cookie, so it does some sort of storage, probably still, to work. I was surprised about that one, too. So blocking cookies also blocks local storage. Huh. This person is right. That was actually what was happening. So it turns out disabling cookies also disables local storage and a bunch of other things. So I think the TLDR for that one, maybe the to-do, is make sure to try and catch exceptions when you use local storage, because it's very interesting here that this site that doesn't need cookies still broke because it was using local storage. So for more details, you can check out Thomas' articles on that. There are also like a bunch of other interesting things happening when you block cookies. So I thought it was an interesting one in the context of thinking about testing. OK, we're actually almost at the end, because I want to take a quick pause between, like, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean before we kind of close the loop. And I want to zoom out a little bit about what's happening with cookies and give you a bit of a summary of the privacy landscape in browsers, very high-level summary. So today there are a bunch of privacy issues on the web. You know, third-party cookies, they can be used for cross-site tracking, although there are lots of use cases that are not about cross-site tracking, but they can be used for cross-site tracking. And there are other things that can be used for cross-site tracking as well. And one example is fingerprinting, as we saw. So what's happening is that browsers are restricting access to third-party cookies and also combating fingerprinting in their own ways. And with this, I mean browsers as products. So you probably know about this. So Safari has Intelligent Tracking Prevention, ITP for short. Then you have Firefox with Enhanced Tracking Protection, ETP for short, that blocks trackers and some fingerprinters and crypto miners as well, which is important in 2022. And Chrome plans on phasing out third-party cookies and also offers easy ways to turn them off in incognito, for example. So as you can see, all of these approaches are a little bit different. So for example, if you actually dig into the details, what Safari's ITP and Firefox's ETP do in practice and do to websites is going to be a little bit different. So in practice, what we get are different behaviors, slightly different behaviors across sites. And so to me, I understand as a consumer, it's good for these products to have different features, so I can pick what I like best. And I know it's good for users because it's important to have all of these privacy features, right, in browsers. But as a developer and as someone who builds sites that should work across browsers, this is a little bit frustrating, maybe. Makes me a bit sad. But there are good news, too. So I was talking about the ways browsers are evolving maybe a little bit differently when it comes to the privacy features they offer to their user. But in reality, this is just one of two movements that are happening at the same time. So this is what we already talked about, built-in browser protection, so privacy features. And the second movement that's happening is that new APIs, new privacy-preserving web APIs are emerging. They are being discussed today, incubated in the YCG and other forums you may know about if you look a little bit into web specifications. So they are being designed as we speak and discussed with the ecosystem. So here's just one example to illustrate a little bit what I'm talking about. So you know about federated login. This is what enables users to use one single authentication token to access multiple systems. So that's federated login today. But it relies on third-party cookies. And like I said, browsers are looking into restricting access to third-party cookies. So what do we want to do? We want to preserve this use case. We still want to have federated login, but we don't want third-party cookies anymore. So what we do in that case is we design a new API. And when I say we, it's like the ecosystem. It's like several browser vendors and ecosystem actors and developers. So a new API in that case that's called FedCM, Federated Credential Management. So it supports federated login, but without third-party cookies. And as you can imagine, this kind of things, this takes time. It's just a little bit like seeing new CSS features land across browsers. This stuff takes time. So just like any standards, this is going to be some work and discussions. But the intent for this solution and others like this one is for this to work across browsers. This is just one example. There's a long list of these, but I thought it was interesting to kind of bring that up for optimism. And with this, we're actually done with our trip. We reached the end of the line, and we completed a complete loop across the planet. And as you can see here, we didn't cover all continents. We really only just kind of scratched the surface. And I wanted to share with you what I found interesting about and actionable about what I learned about web privacy. But that was already a lot. So I won't make a recap, but I just want to tell you that if you take one thing out of this session, I kind of want to tell you to start small. It's a journey. So if you want to improve both privacy and UX on your site, you can start small and start by applying maybe one of the tips I shared with you today, or just discussing that with your team. For example, what are our options for our third parties? Maybe it's a question worth asking on Monday. So I hope you take that home with you. And I also want to take the opportunity to announce that we have a little course on web privacy coming soon that covers in much more depth some of the stuff I talked about today. So stay tuned for that. And until then, please hit me up. This is me on Twitter on the top. So hit me up with your thoughts and your questions on debugging web privacy. Which of these tips are things you think you can apply? Which of these things are you blocked on? What is confusing about privacy or security, really, today for you? So you can find me there. And I'll also be at the community booth after this talk, hanging there a little bit. So it's on the second floor when you go up the escalator on the left. So please come say hi. I'd love to chat with you. And my slides are also linked from there. There's also, I'm going to add to that a little bonus on HTTPS magic that I didn't have time to cover here. So yeah. So thanks so much, everybody, and I'll see you in a bit.